Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this morning's plenary session. I'm Governor Kate Brown from the great state of Oregon and chair of the NGA Health and Human Services Committee. I'm delighted to be moderating this panel this morning with my colleague, Governor Asa Hutchinson from Arkansas. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today to talk about how we can better serve our nation's greatest resource, and that's our young people. At a time of really difficult transition and challenges for our country, we can't afford, either as a society or as an economy, frankly, to leave any of our young people behind. And estimates show that somewhere as many as 5 million young people between the ages of 16 to 24 in the United States are currently not enrolled in an educational program or participating in the workforce. I believe very strongly as governors, we have a responsibility to do everything we can to reach these youth and provide them with avenues of opportunity to reconnect and engage them in continuing education and on-ramps to fulfilling careers. In a lot of cases, of course, there are many barriers to making that happen for these young people, including economic mobility and providing them with the opportunity for their futures. Some of the barriers these young people are facing include homelessness, poor health outcomes, violence, and of course the criminal justice system. In Oregon, we are tackling these barriers one by one, and a great example is a bill that I signed literally just this week, Senate Bill 1008, and it changes the way we try and sentence youth, shifting the focus to prevention and rehabilitation. As we all know, youth who spend time in adult prisons are much more likely to reoffend. Racial and ethnic disparities are more pervasive in our criminal justice system, and young people's brains hold enormous capacity for change and influence. And over the years, we saw how this played out in Oregon, and hundreds of cases impacting hundreds of youth and of course their families as well. What was key for us is the data, and the data really informed our path moving forward. And by changing sentencing guidelines for our youth offenders, we know that our communities can be made safer, and more young people will have the opportunity to use their time in custody to make a turnaround in their lives. Our guests today are going to help us explore a number of these solutions, help us learn a little bit more about these 5 million young people, and hopefully provide us with strategies as governors that we can replicate in our states. So thank you again for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Governor Hutchinson.
Thank you, Governor Brown, and thank you for your leadership in Oregon. Those are good illustrations of progress that can be made. And Arkansas, just like many of the states that are represented by the governors here, we have a low unemployment rate. It's 3.5%, which means that we don't want anyone disconnected. We need to move people into the workforce. We need to give them opportunity, and there's probably more opportunity today than at any time in terms of employment if we make the right decisions in preparing our youth and making sure everybody has a connection. I'll be introducing our panelists soon, but grateful for their leadership on this challenging issue that we face. When I became governor, one of the areas of disconnected youth was our foster care children. And in Arkansas, we had so many children in foster care, and yet we did not have foster homes for them. We had an extreme crisis, a shortage. We convened the faith-based community, the nonprofit community, and created an initiative called Restore Hope. And as a result of that, we've been able to increase foster care parent participation by 15%. More parents saying, we will join and help with our foster children. Children in foster care has also been reduced as well because of some initiatives that we've engaged. We put $24 million of extra money into our foster care system for more caseworkers. And we reduced the ratio of caseworkers from 28-1 down to 18.7 for children for each caseworker. These are areas that we had to make progress in to help these children get more connected and have more opportunity. Like Governor Brown, we looked at our youth services and we closed 2 institutions and moved some of those services to the community so that they can have more access to mental health care, to drug treatment counseling as well. One of the things that I believe is important is you want a disconnected youth to have an opportunity for a GED. But also there is a even greater opportunity to get a high school diploma. And so we passed a law in Arkansas that allowed an adult, non-traditional student to get a high school diploma. And so someone that might be a single mom with children can go back and get their high school diploma. And that has a little bit more oomph even. And so I applaud Goodwill Industries that's partnered with us to accomplish that and to make sure that someone can get their high school diploma regardless of their circumstances in life. Now let me go into our panelists with that background. And today we have the pleasure of being joined by Johanna Bergen, Executive Director of Youth Move National, Monique Miles, Director of the Opportunity Youth Forum and the Deputy Director of the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions, and then John Valverde, Chief Executive Officer of Youth Build USA. Let me first go through a little bit of their background. Ms. Bergen is an advocate for youth with experience in the mental health system who is now working in the field of youth engagement to promote and encourage the inclusion of youth voice in policy change with 11 years of experience advocating for changes in the mental health system to improve care options and treatment for our youth adults with mental health challenges. Ms. Miles manages the work of the Opportunity Youth Forum at the Aspen Institute, which is comprised of a network of over 24 urban, rural, and tribal communities seeking to scale multiple reconnection pathways that achieve better outcomes in education and employment for youth who are disconnected from education and work. Thank you, Ms. Files, for joining us. And Mr. John Valverde is the Chief Executive Officer of Youth Build USA, a nonprofit that provides the unemployed young people who left school without a high school diploma pathways to education, jobs, entrepreneurship, and other opportunities leading to productive livelihoods and community leadership. With that, Ms. Bergen, I'll turn things over to you first to provide an overview of the challenges this young population faces and learn your personal perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you, Governor Hutchinson and Governor Brown, for leading this conversation and for all of your interest in this population of young people who are disconnected. At Youth Move, we frame this to opportunity young people. There is an opportunity for us to offer to these youth and young adults to re-engage. Nearly 1 in 8 youth in America between the ages of 16 and 24 are classified in this population of disconnected youth. And to be clear, this means that they are not connected formally to an education opportunity or an employment opportunity, and that they require some increased capacity and skill building in order to lead a successful, resilient adulthood. There are many advantages of focusing on this population. This is a healthcare concern, this is an employment issue, this is an education issue, this is an economic development issue. You've spent the morning talking about topics that touch very specifically this population, and thank you for this time today. I represent Youth Move, a national youth-driven membership organization dedicated to increasing leadership and advocacy skills within young people who are navigating our country's social systems. That includes mental health, substance misuse, child welfare, juvenile justice. And we believe that by emboldening these young people to share their lived experience, their stories of how services and systems we offered them either helped or didn't help them become successful, and by sharing those with policymakers like you, we can create effective change. Our Youth Move members are passionate about creating a better future for the next generation of young people, and they want to do that by being involved in decisions that shape the policies and the systems in front of us. We are working in an area where the country is interested in our themes. We're interested in the concept of patient-centered healthcare delivery. We're interested in quality improvement measures that let us be more effective with no additional resources. Our lens at Youth Move is let's do that through youth voice. Let's put young people in the driver's seat of their own care and also in the driver's seat of our system structure. I was a young person who struggled with anxiety and depression in my high school years, and when I stepped out into the adult world looking for continued education opportunities, I left my natural supports behind. I found myself facing increasingly difficult mental health challenges and increased needs, and I didn't know where to have those needs met. Additionally, I struggled to care for my physical health. I found myself pregnant at 19, and now I needed to care not only for myself, but for a young daughter who would be joining me. I was blessed to be able to have services wrapped around me, services that met my mental health needs, skilled practitioners who could provide me medication and therapy in order to get back on my feet. I met faculty at an educational institution that were willing to work with me in my alternative education course. And I was provided prenatal and postnatal care designed for teen parents to help empower me to become a successful parent. My story is not the story of every young person. There are youth across our country who are not allowed access to the supports and services like this. Whether it's my voice in hearing what was successful and effective in helping me meet my life goals, or hearing from another young person who missed an opportunity or wasn't offered the support they needed at a moment, these stories can really infuse and create systems that are more effective moving forward. Briefly, young people are so involved in creating opportunities and connections for this population. We have young people who are creating positive, pro-social, peer-based programs in communities where they can invite disconnected young people in to create connection rather than isolation, to experience acceptance instead of stigmatization. We have young people who are working as youth advisors and youth experts to state agencies in each of your states, helping direct mental health and substance use block grant dollars effectively to the community, guiding and serving as advisors to governors' councils and state agencies' councils across the country. Young people are very interested in addressing the silos that exist between our systems. A specific example, most of us live in a state where the children's mental health system is responsible for care up to age 18 or 21 years of age. And then on one day, on a birthday no less, a young person is no longer eligible for those supports that were helping them be successful. And there is what we call a cliff between those services in the children's system and what is needed to access in the adult system. So youth are actively asking policymakers to think about how do we intermix and create a bridge between those children and adult services. Let a young person mix and match between those services to stay with a caring case manager for just a little bit longer to get them set up for successful connection to employment and adulthood. And one last example of what young people are doing in our country is that they are not only joining, but creating an emerging youth peer workforce. The concept of young people helping their peers is not new, but is now being invested in restorative justice practices within the mental health system. The concept of a peer workforce is that a young person who has recently successfully navigated one of our social systems can turn around and assist another young person in navigating that system. They serve as an advocate, as a confidant, as a mentor, and as a role model that there is hope for a successful future. We have a generation of young people who are committed to creating a stronger future, and I think the strongest thing we can do is offer them a seat at the table as we design that successful future. That's a future where young people will not be experiencing disconnection. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bergen. I really appreciate you sharing your personal story, and we really appreciate your extraordinary leadership. Ms. Miles, over to you.
Thank you. So it's a real honor to be here. I want to start by thanking Governors Brown and Hutchinson for this opportunity, in addition to the leadership at NGA. I want to tell you about our work, and I want to talk about strategies that are working across the country to improve education and career outcomes for Opportunity Youth. But before doing so, there are two key points that Ms. Bergman noted that I want to underline. So the first is how we frame this challenge of disconnected youth matters, right? So our work was born out of the White House Council for Community Solutions. They renamed Disconnected Youth Opportunity Youth because their national research found that, number one, it's systems that are disconnected. It is not the young people. And when you talk to young people about the vision they hold for themselves, their families, and their communities, their optimism is palpable. So that asset frame, it matters. It matters not only in our language, but in our programming and in our policies. The second piece that I want to talk about specifically is the civic engagement that young people hold in terms of the ways in which, as they reconnect to education and careers, they're able to also impact their families and their communities. That civic engagement frame is key also to how we can be thinking about the programs and policies that improve outcomes for young people. So really quickly, just to give you a sense of the work we've been doing at the Aspen Institute for the past several years. So to date, we have invested in 28 communities across the country. That includes rural, urban, and tribal communities, because for us, we want to make sure that when we talk about advancing outcomes for our country's most vulnerable, most marginalized young people, that we are documenting the way that our rural communities and also our native and tribal communities are getting to better outcomes. So we have supported cross-system and cross-sector collaboratives in these 28 places, and that means that these collaboratives are bringing together the K-12 system, the post-secondary system, the justice system, the foster care system, in addition to local philanthropy, in addition to elected leadership, so that together with young people at the center, they're able to work on not just problem identification, but solution design. And when we heard the types of outcomes that Governor Brown and Governor Hutchinson have talked about, they're able to use those cross-system and cross-sector collaboratives to get to better outcomes. So to date, we have been able to track not only accelerated system change, now K through 12 partnering with post-secondary, partnering with employers to get to better outcomes, but at the same time, we are also seeing tremendous metric impact. Young people attaining secondary credentials, young people attaining post-secondary credentials, and most critically, the civic engagement and capacity, the civic livelihood of our communities continuing to increase and benefit from these young people. So with that in mind, the two last things that I want to say that are tied to the values of how we have approached this work, we believe at the Aspen Institute, when we talk about the barriers young people face, when we look at the way our systems are disconnected, we believe that that's the result of historical policies that have created the barriers that our young people face today. So when we start talking about what works and what is most effective to improve outcomes for young people, it is critical that we hold that historic perspective in our mind and we center strategies that really embrace equity, and specifically racial equity and gender equity at the center of solutions. The other piece that we will always talk about continuously is why it's critical to have the people most impacted by these issues at the center of problem identification and solution design. Young people are the experts in what works for them, and they are experts in designing solutions that can achieve impact. So there are 3 points that I want to make tied to how we may consider ways for states to continue to improve outcomes for Opportunity Youth. The first is we must make the business case. We must continue to partner with employers, and we have national opportunities to do that at scale to continue to improve not just education, but career outcomes for young people. The second is there are so many both policy barriers and policy opportunities that states can continuously move to generate better outcomes. And then the third piece that I'm going to touch on is thinking about the different ways that we frame the challenge. I want to offer up a couple of ways for states to consider framing not just the challenge, but the opportunity that exists to improve outcomes. So starting with making the business case. We know, thanks to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that nearly 6 million entry-level jobs will be generated by 2020. We also know that when we look at the issue of retainment in these jobs, and particularly retention strategies that employers are using, we know that annually, for example, in the retail sector, there is an annual cost of $10 million to address the retention challenges for entry-level jobs in the retail sector. So when we talk about what states can do, there is an opportunity for governors to partner with national employers that are working in real time on hiring, upskilling, and retention strategies to be able to bring some of those solution sets to the national state level, to the state level, for employers to be able to partner with the local workforce board, for example, or even local employers to be able to bring some of the practices that we've been able to document at Aspen that are getting to, again, training, upskilling, and retention for our country's most young people. And what that means, it's not only connection to the certifications that young people need, but we have seen employers nationally that are committed to hiring opportunity youth look at ways that they can provide transportation, look at ways that they can provide healthcare, look at some of the wraparound supports that we know that our young people need to be successful in the workplace. So that's just one example. The other thing is that we know that right now, while our economy is strong, that there is bipartisan support for these issues. This is an issue of political salience because local employers very much want to work with governors to expand education and training programs that can help meet their workforce needs. The last thing that I want to say is that we know that there are lots of different policies that states can leverage to continue to advance outcomes, particularly career outcomes for opportunity youth. And that brings me to my point about the policies that we may be able to move together. So recently, the Workforce Opportunity and Innovation Act was reauthorized. And this act was set specifically for our country's most vulnerable young adults to be able to access the training and education that's necessary in the workplace. However, when we look at who is able to access these resources, we know that while it's intended for marginalized population, really only 3.7% of young people, even though 80% has been allocated for them, only about 3.7% are able to use these dollars. This is a real opportunity for states to look at how they disaggregate who their population is. For example, in California, they were able to identify that only 5% of English language learners were able to access these employment dollars, even though 1/3 of their workforce are foreign-born people. So this is an opportunity for states to look at the data to figure out who is our workforce, and how do we tap into these state dollars to bring the training and employment skills that are necessary for our young people. The other piece of legislation that I would lift up is that over the past 2 years, we've been able to allocate $195 million additional dollars, new revenue, to support outcomes for opportunity youth. But again, only 8% of these dollars are reaching young people where they live. So part of our work is to make sure that we're partnering with states to support investments in youth programs that are bringing them to the table to help give them the education and skills training that's really important. Last thing on policy. We know that education matters. We know that young people need to, as Governor Hutchinson reminded us, they need secondary education, but we also know to prepare for the future jobs, to prepare for the automation of our jobs, young people need post-secondary education. So there are opportunities to expand funding streams like Pell, for example, that not only provides access to college, but with the expansion of Pell and the America's College Promise Act, we can specifically use this type of legislation at the state level to remove barriers, because this legislation brings, again, transportation, healthcare, and childcare, some of the barriers our young people exist when it comes to work. Finally, what I want to lift up is alternative ways to frame the challenge that our young people experience so that we can collectively innovate on the solutions that states are using. So for those of you who may not know, there is a professor at the University of California, John Powell, who leads work and research noted as targeted universalism. John Powell's research tells us that in order to get to outcomes that really improve benefits for our country's most marginalized people, we must set universal goals, whether that's, third grade education reading levels or, health care for all. We have to set universal goals in how we want to address our country's challenges, but we must target our strategies so that they really do meet our most vulnerable populations where they are. So when we think about what that means for Opportunity Youth, we need to look at justice-involved populations, foster care-involved populations, so that we may be able to target our strategies to meet the unique needs of those populations while also thinking about how all young people in our communities can continue to be supported to thrive. The other piece that I noted earlier is holding equity at the center, being able to look at the different racial identities, looking at the gender identity of the young people that we serve so that once again, we can target our strategy and approach. The last frame that I'll offer that I do think is the center of the conversation we're having here today is continue to support cross-system and cross-sector collaboration. Here's the thing, our challenges are complex. Our solutions not only need to be comprehensive, but they must have baked into them the complexity of the issues we are all working together to solve. So part of what states can do is continue to support flexibility and waivers that allow different sectors and system partners to come together to address these issues. Most recently, we've seen this type of success through the performance partnership pilots, the P3, that have offered states real flexibility with how justice dollars can be brought to child welfare dollars, for example, to improve populations. These are the types of ways that policies can be on-the-ground solutions to meet young people where they live to continue to promote better outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Miles, and I really appreciate you highlighting the fact that we need to put racial and gender, and I'll add LGBTQ equity at the center of program design if we're really going to meet the needs of all of our youth. So thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Valverde. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Governor Brown, Governor Hutchinson, and the leadership at NGA for having me here today. Really hard to follow my colleagues here, and grateful to have colleagues like this who stand with our young people across the country for opportunities for them. I'd like to share a little bit about Youth Build in an effort to build and add to the remarks that have already been made. Youth Build was founded 41 years ago when we asked young people in East Harlem, if you had adult support, what would you do to improve the community? And the young people said, we'd take back the abandoned buildings, we'd rehab them, and we'd create affordable housing. Therefore, the Youth Build name comes from an effort that young people saw as a way to improve their communities and make a difference. And I love that element of Youth Build. As has been said, there are 5 million disconnected or opportunity youth in this country, young people age 16 to 24 out of school and out of work. Youth Build tries to prioritize focusing on the 2.3 million or so of those 5 million who live in poverty. So not all opportunity youth fall into the same category. Perhaps you might describe some of the Youth Build students as the most vulnerable or most disadvantaged. But as has been said, we try not to label them in that way. And we love the opportunity youth framing, not just, as has been said, that they offer an opportunity to the world if their skills and brilliance and intelligence can be unleashed, but they're also if we give them an opportunity, it improves us as a society. And so it's amazing to experience this on the ground at Youth Build programs. From that one program in East Harlem in 1978, a time when the disconnected youth crisis was formally named. So we're 40 years of trying to address this issue without the success that we know we can have together. We've grown now to 252 sites in 44 states across the country, another 60 or so around the world. So Youth Build has become this global movement to address this issue. And we're learning from our work on the international side, and we're doing some sharing of information from what we're doing here domestically to what's happening around the world to really improve outcomes for young people. Our model is unapologetically comprehensive. And as all of you know, and as you've heard already here today, Young people actually do need these wraparound services in order to succeed. Our model has 5 core components. We focus on education. So as Governor Hutchinson said, the GED, the diploma, is becoming more and more common throughout the Youth Build network, and that's critically important. The second component is the career and vocational and workforce development training that's offered now in multiple careers beyond construction. We started with construction, but we've expanded. We also focus on leadership development, believing our young people, as has been said, are the leaders, have the voice, have the solutions to make a difference and impact their communities. We offer life skills components. That core element includes everything from mentoring to financial capability to substance abuse treatment and more. And then finally, we focus on service to the community. And we are extremely grateful for the support that AmeriCorps funding through CNCS, and CEO Barbara Stewart may be in the audience today, that allows us to provide an opportunity for young people to serve. Now, this is a critically important point in our work and in our model. Our young people, for generations, again, focusing on these families and communities that are most impoverished, for generations have been the recipients or the beneficiaries of public assistance or service. Through AmeriCorps and CNCS funding, our young people are able to become the providers of service to their community, and at the end receive an education award, without which they could not even imagine the possibility of going to college. All of this, that core model, these 5 elements, are adaptable all over the world. We've focused on the opioid epidemic, building on that model as the foundation. We've focused on human trafficking, which was discussed this morning as well. Some of our Youth Build programs, 100% homeless students. So we're addressing all the social challenges that all of you are addressing across the country. And like Johanna, this is very personal for me. When I was 20 years old, I made a terrible decision that resulted in my incarceration. I served 16 years in prison for my crime. While I was incarcerated, I was able to access education, career training, leadership development skills, life skills support, and the opportunity to serve and give back to the community inside the prison. I just described the Youth Build model, as you know, and although I'm not a graduate of Youth Build, I am an example of the power of Youth Build. Youth Build is a second chance program, a second chance for homeless young people who've had substance misuse challenges, young people who've dropped out of school, young people who've suffered in poverty and trauma and experienced violence of all kinds. But Youth Build is this safe space and brave space for young people to create the next greatest version of themselves with this comprehensive model, with the support of adults. And as an amazing experience that can be for young people, I'm humbled to say I am the first formerly incarcerated CEO of a nonprofit with a global mission. Thank you. However, I think that means little if the young people of Youth Build don't believe that anything is possible for them with adult support and with programs like Youth Build, and if society doesn't believe in genuine second chances. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be part of the Youth Build movement across the world that's impacting young people, and I'm excited to share more about the ways that we're working with governors and states to build coalitions and collaboratives throughout the country to create this network and web of powerful experiences for young people to transform their lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I know that Governor Hutchinson and I are dying to ask you all millions of questions, but we have a group of governors here that we want to have participate as well. And so I'm going to turn it over to Governor Evers from Wisconsin. And thanks for joining us today.
Thanks a lot, and what a great panel.
Holy smokes,
It's,
yes.
Holy smokes is right. And thanks both governors for your leadership and of course NGA for doing this. So I'm a 42-year veteran of education in the state of Wisconsin. And actually disconnected youth, I hate to put it in this fashion, but when I was a high school principal, the people that hung out at Smokers Corner were the disconnected youth, and I spent as much time learning from them as possible. Because I believe that what's best for our kids is best for our state and best for our country. And so I'm going to talk about two things, one that we've been very successful at, and one that frankly is troubling beyond belief. And the success is on the prevention side. Our state has invested on a bipartisan basis significant resources for 4-year-old kindergarten. We have it almost universally in our state, and just a handful of holdouts. But and we believe those are wise investments. In fact, it continues to grow every single year. In turn, we also know, and all of us in this room know, that when children, especially our littlest kids, are exposed to extreme poverty, the trauma that's connected with that is significant. And so birth to 3 programming is obviously important, and I think we're working hard to make sure that every little kid has that opportunity, and we're getting there. But additionally, one of the success stories is we've been able to double the mental health funding for behavioral health funding for our elementary and secondary kids, and our littlest kids too, because it's not that every kid that has a mental health issue is going to become disconnected, but it certainly is a precursor for a lot of children moving forward. In addition, the issue of special education, which we've been able to fund at a higher level than ever before in this last budget on a bipartisan basis. So prevention is important, connecting the dots is important, as I think every one of the speakers talked about. The area that keeps me awake at night more than probably anything else is the issue of juvenile justice reform. Any justice reform is obviously important, but I had the opportunity my first week in office of visiting our juvenile prison, and that's what it is in northern Wisconsin. And it was a controversial piece where for many years the young people there and the adults that ran it were at war with each other. And I came away with lots of ideas, but the most important thing is I came away with these young people who many of them have done significantly bad things. They're still kids. They're still kids in their hometowns and into their neighborhoods, and getting the mental health treatment that they deserve, getting that second chance that you talked about. And I think that is, even though it's a small end, but it's a very important small end, because retribution has little place in our world, and these young people, especially those that are caught up into our justice system, need a way out, need to make sure that they have the rehabilitation services and the mental health services that they need. And I'm looking forward to having bipartisan support for that effort. So thank you very much.
So may I respond?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so, thank you so much for so eloquently walking through what keeps you up at night. These are also the things that keep me up at night as well. I wanted to start with your lifting up universal pre-K as part of the prevention strategy. And part of what I really want to offer up is what we see nationally, and I think many people call the 2-generation approach, right? So the reason why universal pre-K is so important is because what we know is that young adults on the margins of trying to reconnect to education, trying to really get on a second chance to career outcomes, not only do they need adequate childcare, they also need their child to receive the highest quality education, because what we know from the research is that early childhood education puts them on the path to being able to disrupt multi-generational poverty. So I would argue that it's the coupling of not only making pre-K universally available, but how programs are able to marry that with the type of GED programming that states have for older adults, and high school completion diploma programs that they have as well. And even community colleges have a role to play in trying to couple both access to universal pre-K for young people while helping the parents also get back on a path to attaining a secondary credential and making connections to the post-secondary piece. Because together, when you are really looking at how you move generations, more than one generation out of poverty, it has the greatest opportunity to be successful and impactful. So that's one. The other thing I wanted to pick up on that you talked about was the role that trauma plays, and I think limiting outcomes for young adults especially. One of the things that we have also seen nationally be very effective, and again, this gets back to how we frame the challenges our young people face, is thinking about how we move from trauma-informed care to healing-centered practices and approaches. What do I mean? What I mean is that when you talk to young people who have, experienced significant trauma, who have more than one or two ACEs in their life, what young people say is that the truth is that I'm so much bigger than the trauma I experienced. And when I have this opportunity to get back onto a meaningful path, an opportunity for a second chance opportunity, which both of my panelists just so eloquently spoke to, the vision and the impact I'm able to have is so much greater. And so that healing-centered frame is really about both the healing and health that young people need, but the civic activation and participation that young people are able to tap into and enact as they're able to make progress on their healing journey. The last thing that I want to say is I really want to speak to this juvenile justice piece. I started my career actually teaching in the justice system for the state of Massachusetts, specifically in Boston. What I want to tell you, and maybe everyone knows this, but if you are an African American male without a high school credential, you are 68% more likely to end up in the justice system. This is not jail, I'm talking about prison, federal prison. And that means that, again, 70% more likely without a high school education to end up in our country's prison system. So what does that mean? That means that we have opportunities to expand things like Pell funding, but it also means that the restorative justice practices are so critical. You talked about retribution. Well, restorative practice say, not only do I want to be able to amend what's happened for this person who may have experienced harm, but the restorative justice practices are for that person and for that person's family as well. And then the last thing that we work on a lot are alternatives to incarceration. So we heard some of this from the governors as well, but looking at how instead of young people for sort of daily offenses, everything from unpaid bills, citations for missing school, et cetera, how do we actually organize to do the advocacy that says that we are no longer going to allow these types of penalties to create both pipelines into prison for young people, while we are meaningfully designing programs that are actually alternatives to incarceration for our country's young adults.
Thank you. Go ahead.
If I can just add some on-the-ground work. First, thank you very much for your support of Youth Build in your state. You have a powerful network there that really believes in young people and second chances, and I've had a chance to visit some of the programs, and it's amazing to see what's possible when there's this level of commitment. And in addition to what has already been said, and you know this, I mean, I'm encouraged, but also want to keep an eye on this focus on neuroscience, really recognizing that the young brain is not fully developed until 25. I'll be 50 this year. It's probably not fully developed in me yet either. And really recognizing that they are children. And we've experienced in Youth Build throughout our network here in this country, about 1/3 of the young people have had criminal justice involvement. So this second chance frame is a powerful frame. I totally agree, trauma-informed care is not enough. Critically important, not enough. We are beginning to do restorative justice initiatives throughout our network, making that part of the culture of Youth Build. And I want to add the element of love. which isn't often said because it's mushy and what is love? And while we recognize love is not enough, if a young person feels that someone cares about them, believes in them, the young person starts to trust that person. If the young person trusts that person, they start to share their pain, their trauma, their challenges. If they begin to let those things go, they can actually heal. And if there's a restorative healing frame within the program, that can be accelerated. That really supports the young person's development and transformation. And lastly, I'll say, today in Southern California, we have a resource fair with our Southern Los Angeles Collaborative for the juvenile justice system there. So Youth Build operates, some of our programs operate within the juvenile justice system, and many of our programs obviously support the reentry of young people returning to their communities, but we're also serving as a diversion program, an alternative to incarceration, and would like to do more of that. We believe that our work and people like us who support young people in this way could be transformative for communities and the systems. Thank you.
Ms. Miles, go ahead.
There's just one thing I want to add. Love is the core value. I think it anchors our hope, and it helps to really direct our vision for what we can collectively accomplish together. But I would also argue that empathy is just as important as love, because to the point about brain science research, I think that there are lots of people that are given second chances. I think that when we talk about solutions that work, it's really important to hold an equity lens, because I think not all of our country's young people get a second chance in the ways in which they deserve it. And that's why I would argue that it's not only that we need to love all of our young people, but we need to have deep empathy for all of our young people so that we can make sure that the solutions we design meet the needs of all of our young people.
Thank you, and I'll just add on our work in terms of juvenile justice reform, in addition to having the data around neuroscience and of course pervasive racial inequities, we were able to bring a broad array of political partners from the ACLU to the Koch industries to work together, and it produced phenomenal results, and so the proof is in the pudding. So, other governors, Governor Herbert.
I can make this work here. Thank you. I think this is a very important subject, and thank you for your testimony here in council to us today as governors. I think we all recognize that the youth are the rising generation of leaders. Our future is tied to our youth, and we need to make sure they have every opportunity to build upon us and maybe make things better. So thank you. My first thoughts are why? Why do we have young people who are disconnected? And there's probably a variety of reasons for that. Rather than dwell on the whys, the question is, how can we in fact prevent it from happening? You've talked about, John, we need to bring love, education. Some of this is about treatment of fixing the problem. I want to see, do we talk about, you say we don't talk about love. Do we talk about parenting? Do we talk about the importance of nurturing young people? I know my wife, who's First Lady, has an initiative on parenting. Families come in all different kinds of sizes and shapes and makeups. And are we in fact having our parents be taught how to parent? I know none of my kids came with any instruction manual. They're all different little personalities, and so they're not all treated the same. But the things we want to teach them about honesty, integrity, civic involvement, support your country, be involved. So what are we talking about? Are you talking anything about the prevention side when it comes to like parenting and something we sometimes feel like, is that something government should be involved with?
Who'd like to tackle that question?
I could start. What was coming up as we were all talking today is the question of what is prevention. And if we do the 5 why activity and we keep asking, why is this happening? Why is this happening? At each level, I feel like there's another opportunity to define something as prevention. So initially, as you started speaking, I started thinking about the role of addressing mental health supports in our education system. A very important place for young people to show up and be safe and brave if they're provided the support that they need. They may be able to be safe and brave in the school day when they aren't able to be safe and brave in their home community. And that bringing mental health language and supports to school would end up being a form of prevention for young people becoming disconnected in their teen years. And you're challenging us to go even deeper into really the intersection of intergenerational trauma. This is a multi-generational problem, and I think that Monique, you spoke very eloquently to the idea of meeting the need of a child and the need of a parent at the same time. We have many young people who say that part of their growing up responsibility was caring for their parents' mental health needs. And so how do we as leaders feel about that? That should not, at the end of the day, be a young person's responsibility. So I think there are some very unique opportunities for us to ask children and youth what their families need, and to ask parents what they need, and really have a sort of a bi-parallel approach in that. It's a really good point.
And I would add that, on the prevention side, so our work is primarily, on the intervention side, but on the prevention side, part of what we also support, particularly as it relates to the K through 12 system to be able to do, is to design an early warning system so that we're able to mediate when we can see that young people are getting off track. And so that includes everything from tracking credit attainment for young people, so that they're not overage and undercredited, to figuring out in real time, as soon as that school system is not working, what does the alternative path look like? And when I talked about supporting cross-system, cross-sector collaboratives, I would say that probably 75% of our work is on the intervention side, but 25% of it is on the prevention side, because what we recognize is that we're going to continue to lose all of these young people, so at some point we have to go back and turn off the valve, right? So that then most of our work is 100% prevention. That's where we aim to get in terms of supporting communities across the country. So we are working with school systems, again, all across the United States, to help build early warning systems with the K through 12 school, so that they're able to really be proactive and help young people that are demonstrating signs of getting off track. The other thing that I would say is that in supporting the community collaboratives, those cross-system, cross-sector partnerships I talked about earlier, there are some communities. I was recently just in a rural community in Texas. I actually visited 3 rural communities in Texas where the community wasn't willing to come to the table to talk about strategies to support disconnected young people unless the parents were in the room. So the conversation centered the parents and the young people together, talking about how the strategy would need to employ this sort of two-generation focus in order to effectively move young people. There was nothing we could do for those students if we weren't also doing something for the parents. So I only say that to say is that, context matters. Every place is different, but for us to be able to effectively support cross-system, cross-sector collaboratives, we know that in some communities, it's a non-starter to talk about reconnecting young people without holding a vision for what it means to bring parents to the table as part of this strategy.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Governor Pritzker. A last quick question before we close out this session.
Well, I want to make a comment and then ask for reaction by the panel. But it's in reaction also to Governor Herbert's comment and question about prevention. Because first I want to commend you here in the state of Utah. I actually, before I was governor, when I was in the private sector, I was also involved for a couple of decades in early childhood education, expanding opportunities for providing services to children 0 to 5. Particularly the most disadvantaged. And here in Utah, you under your leadership, early childhood has really grown significantly. And so I want to commend you. And I know your wife does a lot of work in this area too with parents. But let me, so early childhood is, to me, on the prevention side, a hugely important aspect. It's, treating, I don't know if that's the right word here, but the parents and providing them education while we're also providing the resources that children need in those very earliest years, home visitation, early intervention programs, and preschool. But I find, as governor, looking at the biggest, most challenging issues here are in my Department of Children and Family Services, the children who are most in need, who have the biggest challenges. Their parents have the biggest challenges. There's a desire to keep parents and children together, even when you have situations of neglect that are reported and so on. Substance abuse and mental health treatment are, a huge percentage of the issues of intact families. And I guess I'm throwing to the panel this question of when you think about prevention, you talked about mental health services for children who are coming out of or who are at the very tail end of being served by the state. But I also think it's a parent issue too, mental health needs, treatment needs, and substance abuse treatment needs. So I guess I'm throwing it back to you to get your reaction to what should we be doing to make sure that those services are available to both the children and the adults. What have you seen that works well, recognizing that we all have limited resources, but know that we need to address these challenges in our states?
Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Governor. I think there is something to the two-generational approach. As you noted, just to continue with the on-the-ground lens from Youth Build, we have young people who are part of families that have generational gang involvement. For example, you're expected to join at whatever age in your life. And there, as I mentioned, we focus on this half of the 5 million that are most impoverished. So many of the young people can't even imagine going to college or can't even imagine a career. How we break that has to include the two-generation approach. Youth Build, as an adaptable model, can have parenting classes. Many of our young people at 17 are parents, of course, you know this. So we have parenting classes for them, and then separate parenting classes for the parents. Evidence shows you don't want to mix them, but you have moments where the parent and the child actually discuss what it means to be a parent, and that two-generational approach starts to break that cycle. So it's an example of the ways that on the ground you can support substance abuse treatment, mental health supports, getting the parent connected when you can. It is a major challenge, but the two-generational model has shown to be effective in many situations, and I think it's something worth exploring further.
So I'll just quickly add two things. I think first and foremost, what we've seen states do really effectively is figure out, how do you go to where people live? When we start talking about, challenges around substance abuse or mental health, it is so critical that our strategies in community really are applied specifically where people live. I mentioned the nurse practitioner partnership earlier, which really supports nurses to go into people's homes to be able to deliver these services with that two-generation approach. So I would say as states are thinking about strategies, a key to what works effectively, I've also seen this in tribal communities as well, and of course in urban places, and it's figuring out how do you implement strategies and solutions, your state's most effective programs, but how do you bring them to where the people most impacted live? And then the second thing that I want to talk about, because Joanna talked about this earlier, is it's very much true that, especially for young people remanded to the child welfare system, that there's a point where support ends and young people fall off a proverbial cliff in terms of the services that they need. We've seen states, Maine is a really great example, that have been able to pass legislation that provides ongoing support for young people to continue to reap services from the foster care system up to the age of 26. That is really important, right? Because the state of Maine essentially said that so long as you are enrolled in education, you will continue to receive all of these wraparound transitional support services and so will your parents, so long as you are on track to attaining a secondary credential. Texas is an example of another state that has passed legislation to say that these education dollars will follow a young person to the age of 26 so that they can do the important work that Governor Hutchinson reminded us of earlier, which is complete a secondary credential, which we know is predictive for young people and adults being able to participate in their local economy. So I only say that to say that some of the work that states can do is looking at ways they're able to increase some of these supports so that young people don't fall off of these proverbial cliffs, and they're able to leverage these supports because, again, it's not that magically at the age of 18, any young person is necessarily ready to enter society. So how do we figure out a way to sequence supports and maybe even scaffold supports through our systems so that young adults can get onto these paths while also helping their children as well?
So unfortunately, we are out of time. I would love to continue this conversation forever. Governor Hutchinson, one last takeaway.
Well, very briefly, to me, the overarching takeaway from all of these excellent presentations is the responsibility that we have as governors. These are youth, they're young people, they have got challenges that in most circumstances are not any responsibility of their own. And so we have a responsibility to address that. The other thing that each of you mentioned, Johanna, you mentioned youth engagement. Monique, you mentioned civic engagement. And John, you talked about service. And we as governors have to figure out ways that we can listen to our young people, make sure that we're meeting their needs, and that we're making sure that they have the greatest opportunity. So thank you for your inspiration and the emphasis upon the responsibility that we have.
Thank you. And I think for me, I could, again, respond with many things, but really important to maintain a cross-system, cross-sector, collaborative and collective approach if we're going to make this happen. These children are all of our responsibilities, and we all need to work together. So thank you to the panel members, Mr. Valverde, Ms. Miles, Ms. Burgum, for your extraordinary leadership in addressing the needs of our opportunity youth across the United States. We look forward to partnering with you, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.